For today's workshop, we have Neil Davie presenting Contemporary Casework Design. It's not just cabinets. After leaving Sandia Labs in 2012, Neil had the opportunity to design his contemporary home from the ground up and fabricate the cabinetry and interior doors, ending a roughly 25-year pause in his woodworking. Most of the cabinet facings were executed in bamboo plywood, and the kitchen and guest bath were featured in articles published in 2016 issues of Sukasa magazine. Neil will present a brief history of modern and contemporary design, along with a discussion of features that should be included or avoided in a successful contemporary design. He will introduce the concept of negative space in design and present his thoughts on approaching a big design project, a new construction or remodel type project. Since the kitchen forms a central part of the contemporary open floor plan, the visual aspects, not just cabinets, of kitchen design will be emphasized. This is not a kitchen layout workshop. Neil will present photos from his project and relate them to previous design discussions and show a few fabrication details. Some background on Neil. So he retired from Sandia Labs in 2012, where he had been employed for 34 years. During his time there, he served as a mechanical impact and large centrifuge test engineer and a rocket sled track test director. I like that one. Neil earned bachelor degrees in both math and physics, as well as a master's degree in mechanical engineering. Neil's interest in woodworking began after college and starting a charter membership to Fine Woodworking magazine. He is self-taught through reading and doing. Neil was an early member of AWA from 81 through 84 and rejoined in 2016. So please give Neil a warm welcome.
Can you hear me now? Good? All right. So when we speak of casework, it generally refers to an object of wood that has whose parts can form a case, like a desk or a dresser, kitchen cabinet, those kinds of things. It might also refer to the craft employed to construct those objects. However, architects and builders generally restrict that definition to items built in to the structure of the house or office or whatever, and rather than including freestanding furnitures. So hence the as a result of that desire to include it in the structure, all of those things need to be, this is where it may be possible to design a freestanding piece of furniture that either is different than the style of the house, whereas a house you want to have everything integrated into the architecture. So as a result of that, you need to have all sorts of other things that fit with the design of your cabinetry. Hence the subtitle, it's not just cabinets. There's lighting, there's flooring, there's fixtures, plumbing fixtures, all sorts of things that need to be considered, and we're going to talk about a few of those today. And in a contemporary design, for a house at least, the open floor plan is almost an essential design feature. Some people call it a great room concept. So we're going to really focus on the visual aspects of the design of a great room and the kitchen in particular. So I'd like to, take a survey. How many distinguish between the descriptor modern and contemporary? Any? Or do you just use them interchangeably? Interchangeably? Yeah. Interchangeably. How many have a distinction between modern and contemporary? All right, Michael. And when we talk about contemporary design in general, you might hear descriptors like clean, crisp lines, sophisticated, minimalistic, maybe even commercial or industrial kind of descriptors. So remember your answer today, and see later in the presentation if you have a different opinion about modern and contemporary. So minimalist. On a scale of 1 to 4, being 1, you like lots of stuff, and 4 being you like very minimalistic design detailing. 1s. And if you're a hoarder, just say 1. We won't embarrass you. So how many are 1s? Like lots of stuff. 2, 3, 4 minimalist. Okay, so kind of evenly distributed, which is kind of what I expected. Let's see. Sorry? Comment? No, okay. In preparation for this workshop, there's a lot of subjectivity in design, and you're going to hear a lot of opinions from me, but I've also, in preparing for this design project that we did, I interviewed a couple of very well-known designers in Albuquerque. Eric Spurlock is a custom home architect and builder. He's done homes all over the world, mostly contemporary, but he'll do any style that customer wants. And Erin Williams, she's now with Ernest Thompson Furniture. She's one of their main designers. She formerly was a independent contractor working with her mother, Suzanne Williams. So the importance of design is what this presentation is about, is design. Not so much, we're going to talk about a little bit of construction techniques as well, but mostly design. It makes that first visual impact when you're entering a space. And you might see, well, it's organized or clean or sophisticated, bold, colorful, or it might be disorganized or cluttered, tacky, or boring. So even if you are boring and disorganized, you probably don't want your designs to reveal that about yourself. So woodworkers, as a group, we have some failures and biases, and we need to recognize those when we're doing our design. I think that generally we have insufficient time devoted to the design. We're focused, we're ready to cut wood and make chips and make that dovetail or whatever you're excited about making, and you kind of gloss over the design. So you can, we settle on familiar concepts. We make our decisions on design rather than, execution rather than design. We have great fabrication, and it's wasted on lousy designs. And then everybody's guilty of this. We have excessive pride in our own work and our own design, so that can lead us to things that aren't so great. So I wanted to talk about a design concept that I think is useful in almost any kind of design, and it's negative space. Generally, you talk about negative space when you're talking about photography or say a painting. You have a subject that's maybe centered roughly in the photo or in the artwork, and surrounding that, like in a photo, you might have sort of images that are out of focus. So you're not really drawn to those out of focus things. You're drawn to the in focus subject, and so that would be considered negative space. Or maybe there's a blank piece on your canvas. So art and photo is a very common use of negative space in creating your design, but it can also apply to three-dimensional spaces as well. So positive space is what you put into a space. Furniture, cabinets, decorations, art, even busy surface patterns can come off as a positive space. Whereas negative space is what's not there, the cantilevered space under a cantilevered counter, volumes overhead, blank walls, including aisles and surfaces that have minimal patterns. And so when you enter a room, your mind is trying to process what's going on in that room in terms of the design. And it's just human nature to do that. And so there's too much stuff. Your mind is distracted by trying to figure out what's all here. And maybe you've made a nice piece of furniture over in the corner up against the wall, and it's just kind of lost in all the clutter. So having enough negative space. Maybe you have a wall that has nothing else on it, but you have that nice table in front of it. Now you're going to focus on the table and not all the future garage sale items and decorations that are on the wall. So that's I'm trying to get you to think about negative and positive space as being a tool you can use when creating a design. And obviously the balance is an individual choice. As we had that survey, some people like lots of stuff and others like not very much stuff. So, but think about your own space. And I think there's a concept, I don't know if this is my idea or not, but I call it positive space creep. So as you get used to your own space, it's you don't need as much mental processing anymore because you know where everything is and you've already figured it out. And so you go in there and say, oh, there's a little space on the wall where I can put a picture, or I can make this turning on this shelf surrounded by these other garage sale items. So it's okay to have a space on the wall that only has one painting, or a shelf that only has one thing on it. If you have that nice turning, you don't want it surrounded by those future garage sale items. You want someone to focus on the turning, not a whole bunch of stuff on there. So just be thinking about those when you're designing just in general. So if you like lots of stuff, be deliberate about where you put it, how you place it. There are definitely things you're going to want people to notice and see, and just be deliberate about that and keep it organized and clean. But so it's more work for you if you like that. So I'm not saying that's wrong or anything, but it's just be deliberate and organized and clean. So I'm going to go through some examples. I picked off the internet just to kind of talk about positive and negative space. Not much negative space in this picture here. I don't know if this is a store or it's a kitchen. It looks like there's a stove in the background and everything. So no more comment about that. Here's a little more subtle example of too much stuff, in my opinion. You've got this blue soffit up there, and you've got a curtain with some oddball patterns on it, and even the backsplash has a pattern on it. And you have 3 light pendants that are all different. Even you took the clutter off the island there, there's too much stuff. And you have this nice view out the window, I would think. It looks like there's some nice garden out there, but you have all this stuff in front of your view. So just an example of too much positive space, not enough negative space. Now this example is where you have a lot of the same stuff, and it comes across as a negative space, all the uniform cabinet wood. And so it would have been nice to have different groupings of cabinets. Maybe the island was a different material or different stain or whatever. And especially, I think that's probably a pantry over to the left, something different over there. And just in terms of layout here, the refrigerator is really poorly placed. You can't even open the door without it banging into the adjacent wall there. So here's a very contemporary design that I think a lot of architects would just love, because they like white spaces and white houses, and to me that's too much negative space, and maybe you like this, and there's nothing wrong with that. Let's talk about some ideas about how we would change this. Yeah.
I just like to speak up as an architect. Yeah, a lot of us will design a space like that, where the bare space is, when it's finished and the contractor leaves, is designed so that the occupant, the focal point points in and changing as they wish.
Exactly. I mean, that's the purpose of enough negative space so that you're not distracted by a lot of stuff. You're able to put that nice piece of furniture or that nice piece of artwork and it be the center of your attention. So for me, though, I think I would probably make just some ideas, and let's kick out some ideas as we're going through here.
Could it have a different color on the accent wall, or do that far wall, right? Something bold.
Right, it could do that, and possibly the upper cabinets could be a different color or material. Yeah.
Well, I think the most important part is, the most important piece is the island. And that should have probably a color on the top of that island.
On the island, yeah.
And leave a dark, so white on the bottom.
Okay.
You could make your cabinets a different color, but then that would draw away from the island.
Right.
So along with your idea, I kind of like the idea of maybe you made the counter surfaces on the island and the cabinet back there maybe a darker gray or a medium gray or something like that would not be distracting, but yet it would add to some interest here. Yeah.
Remove the clock and install a window and put 2 kids and a golden retriever in there.
All right. Yeah.
For frustrated woodworkers, you'd have the opportunity to change out the countertop on the island to, like I did in my house, with black walnut laminated top, and it would bring some earthy touch to it to get away from all that contamination.
So another thing that, and we'll talk about this more later, but a lot of contemporary designs have a soffit, or some people call them a cloud, over the island. It helps define that space. And that could be a different material, maybe a wood tone to go with the flooring, perhaps. Just some ideas. And none of these are right or wrong. It's what I'm trying to do is get you to think about negative space and where your balance is and how you would change it.
Shouldn't those stools be white?
Maybe the floor too, right? This is a. Is this a progressive insurance ad or something? You've seen that, right? Derek.
So one thing that I don't think we've mentioned so far is that you view different things in different ways. Sometimes you're going to be entering the room and getting this whole impression. But a lot of the time in the kitchen, you're chopping vegetables or rolling out dough or doing whatever preparation task. You're going to be quite close to a surface. And that's a time when something like wood grain is very attractive. At a distance, it just sort of blurs into a middle tone. But if you can see a beautiful piece of walnut or rosewood or whatever else it is while you're working, that might be something that you're satisfied with.
So one other comment, just in a layout thing, I think just kind of judging by the scale of things, that aisle between the island and refrigerator is only about 3 feet, way too narrow. And the door opens away from the kitchen, so what's with that? So let's talk about contemporary versus modern. So good designers are always looking to innovate, and the modern design era, from what I've read, begins around 1930, and there's a couple of things driving that. One was a rebellion against ornamentation of the previous 1920s Art Deco era. And there was also a desire for simpler forms as an artistic expression. Plus, there was also, this is the Depression, 1930, right? So there was a motivation to make things less expensive. So simple, crisp lines could lead to that sort of economic efficiency. So architects and designers have a more specific definition here. And modern is a specific design style exemplified by the mid-century modern architecture, roughly 1930 to 1965. And so in contrast to contemporary, which is continuously evolving in any current design style, but generally following a modern concepts using current technology and materials. So I picked this off the internet, and there was several people that were saying that this structure at the German Pavilion at the 1929 World's Fair was the beginning of modern. This guy, Ludwig, was credited with the less is more philosophy to describe his design philosophy. So the modern concepts here, you have lots of glass, you have a lot of natural materials, and I say that concrete, stone, and wood would be considered natural materials, although in this example there's not much wood. Open, spacious interiors. So those are sort of general design concepts of mid-century modern architecture. Here's an example of a 1959 historic landmark in Los Angeles. Now, you don't have many lots that have this kind of view as you see back there of the entire city, but I think the design and the cabinetry, you see the crisp lines, flat cabinet facings, and I don't know if you can see for this, but there's a lot of grain matching from the drawers to the door fronts. And so I think this design would still work quite well today, update some of the plumbing fixtures and various things. I wanted to point out the gender stereotypical roles also from 1959. So.
Might also notice the smog out there.
Yeah. You want to move there? Let's see. Another example I found, these are actually steel cabinets from 1950s. What I wanted to point out here is the stone and the vaulted ceilings, the sort of post and beam windows. Those are very exemplary of mid-century modern architecture. I'm not sure that the table really fits in terms of its design, but anyway. A ship sails into harbor with two identical piers. And the mate at the helm asks, where shall we put in, Captain? And the captain says, I don't know, it's a paradox. Ooh. All right. So a real paradox, there are exceptions to every rule. I'll try to do that. So I'm going to make a stab at saying, well, what are the required or very essential design features of modern and contemporary design? So obviously there's going to be some exceptions to those rules, but let's make a stab at it anyway. So simple crisp lines, simple geometries, no ornamentation or molding, so you wouldn't have a crown molding in modern design generally. You wouldn't have OG profiles on your cabinetry. You'd have very simple crisp lines. Generally minimalist architecture. Abundant natural finishes like wood, stone, and concrete. Subtle and neutral colors rather than really bold, contrasting colors. Common features, ample windows designed to bring the outdoors in. Post and beam, exposed beams, slanted vaulted volumes. And cabinet features generally would be a subtle wood grain. You might have a stronger grain on maybe a small accent area. Euro-style cabinetry, flat face doors, simple hardware. So contemporary is similar to that. Yeah, go ahead.
I just wonder, a lot of, it seems to me what you're talking about is rectilinear items kind of define modern. And I wonder, does natural edge or round, curved surfaces fit into a modern?
So now we're talking about mid-century modern, and generally, paradox here, generally it's not curved surfaces. It's rectilinear type surfaces and slanted volumes. Architects, I know we got 2 architects in here. Would you guys agree with that? Pretty much? Yeah.
There are, and like your heading says, there are exceptions, very much so.
So right. So in making these sort of rules, it tries to give you some guidelines, and if you want to deviate, you can do that, but it's riskier. You know, you might come off as some eclectic mix of stuff.
This list, and I started architecture school literally in '65 when you have the kind of classical end of the modern period before that contemporary started. And this list, I think, is a baseline for contemporary as we viewed it then, back in the mid-'60s. That there's everything you have here was considered a given as we were continuing design in the mid-'60s, and went on from here to explore other shapes like circles and that. But I don't think this by any means is exclusive. A lot of this is very much a part of contemporary design. The other thing that I would add to mid-century is there's a lot, especially in residential construction, the prairie style was considered part of mid-century modern, and this does not describe prairie style. So I mean there are a lot of exceptions.
Yeah, we could study for a long time on this, but
Yeah.
trying to highlight some of the stuff.
Right.
So trying to come up with a similar list for contemporary. So again, that contemporary, remember, is sort of following the modern styles generally, but using more current technology and materials. So emphasis on man-made instead of natural materials. There's a layered and bold contrasting finish is often in contemporary, at least what's going on now. And I'll try to illustrate that later, but what I mean by layered and bold construction. Ample negative space for art placement. Intersecting asymmetric geometry shapes are common, not only rectilinear but also circular, possibly curved. So that the intersecting is a real common thing. You look at some of the exteriors of some of the modern businesses around that are stuck over. They have a vertical shape and then a horizontal one intersecting, but maybe not in the same plane. So those are very common. Kitchens are usually part of a great room or adjacent living and dining space. Minimize your stuff on your counters unless you're using it. That's probably true for any kind of kitchen you have. And this is a personal preference, and it kind of depends on how much space you have available. But if you have a small space, this is really hard to do, is to keep things off the walls or furniture's away from the wall. Especially on a nice view window, you want to be able to walk up to that window and not be looking over the couch or a table. It just makes the space feel more inviting, I believe. So if you have the luxury of space, move your furniture in. Cabinets, horizontal and sequenced grain is real common. And when I say sequenced grain, if you're going from door to door to door, the horizontal grain is cut from the same piece of wood or plywood, so you match the grain as it goes across the face of your cabinetry. And if you do vertical, you would do the same thing. You have a drawer and a door front. The vertical grain you want that to match on each of those pairs of drawers and door fronts. Laminate and painted finishes are common. Subtle wood grain but strong figure on accent areas. Contrasting cabinet groupings. So that kind of contributes to the layered look I was talking about. You might have, rather than like this wall back here, you guys turn around and see this bamboo cabinetry here, you might want to say, let's make that bank of uppers a different material or different color. That's the contrasting cabinet groupings. You don't want to get busy. You want these, so you wouldn't want to do every other door in a different color. That would just look silly. But as a group to the upper cabinets, make that different. Again, Euro style cabinets, flat doors, sleek hardware, and carefully integrated appliances. We're going to talk about that later. Now, flat doors, you can say, well, we've got plywood panels like you have back here. Let's see, do I have an example? You can do paneled doors, but really be really careful about how you do this. This is a picture from Christoph that presented last fall, his contemporary cabinetry. And the lower cabinet doors are frame and panel, but the panel is flush to the outside face of the frame. And there's a small reveal around it. And you could even enlarge that reveal and maybe even stain it or paint it a different color. It would be a good contemporary door. I want to comment on the glass uppers. If you put clear glass on a cabinet door, you want to make sure what you're going to put in there is what you want to see. Okay? Okay? So, he's got lightly frosted, it's a kitchen, but you're going to have all kinds of stuff in there. And so, the other thing about a frosted, either etched or sandblasted glass is that as soon as you touch your nose and touch that frosted surface, it's got like a little grease on it, or from your cooking oils or whatever. It's almost impossible to clean. It's really hard. So at least you'd want to put it on the inside of the cabinetry here. I think he did. But another solution is a laminated glass, like your automobile windshield, which is 2 layers of glass with a plastic layer in between. And you can get those in all sorts of different colors, white, gray, any color you want to. And that would be an option for a glass door panel that you don't want to see what's in your cabinetry. This is an example of a good contemporary example from Eric Spurlock. He's one of the guys I interviewed. And the cabinets were made here in Albuquerque by PCM Woodworks. So this shows what I mean by layered and contrasting cabinet groups. You've got different colored counters, and you've got sequence grain on the island, sequence grain on the uppers flanking the hood, and you have a different color. I think this cabinetry around the refrigerator and the cabinetry in the far base is the same material. All of this is a wood grain textured melamine. I'm going to pass these around here. So that's let's pass it around this side. I got 2 of these. So this is an example of textured melamine that's coming around that's in these cabinetry here. Let's see. So one thing I want to point out is that the appliances, you can't tell too much on the left, but the refrigerator is what I would consider nicely integrated. It's not sticking out too far. It's not got huge gaps around it. So it's nicely integrated. One thing I don't really agree with is the wood grain on the floor, but there's a lot of wood grain going on elsewhere. It's maybe too much. Yes, sir.
So would you say that contemporary tends towards a uniform grain rather than a compacted grain or highly figured?
A subtle grain patterns rather than highly figured. Now you could probably get away with a small area that was highly figured. I haven't seen, I don't know if I've seen any examples of a good contemporary design that has highly figured cabinetry. Anybody disagree?
What makes that room is the tile behind the vent, the stove vent going all the way to the ceiling.
Yeah, it's a nice, yeah. The other thing to notice, there is a soffit above the island. And again, this is part of a great room. Over here is a living space, maybe dining there as well. And so looks like maybe a 12-foot ceiling, and so you put that soffit over the island, and it helps to define the kitchen from the rest of the great room. So an example of a contemporary bath, I think the colors in here really just speak contemporary to me. It's a very relaxing feel, which is what you want for a bathroom, I believe. You notice the sequence grain on the vertical cabinetry. The other thing I wanted to point out, and I wish I'd seen this idea before, but is the recessed towel bars under each of the sinks. Instead of having to go across the counter to grab that towel and drip everywhere, you just go down and there's the towel. So notice the cantilevered cabinets. That's a real common feature in contemporary design. It adds a little negative space to that room. Let's see. Now quiz time. Modern or contemporary? Modern? Contemporary? Who says modern? Raise your hand. So I would say, based on what we said, this is more modern than contemporary. You've got a natural stone floor, you got lots of wood, you don't have a lot of bold coloration. Architect's shaking his head over here.
It's overwhelming. There are just too many contrasting patterns.
Too busy.
Try to find a focal point when you look at that.
I don't see a focal point.
You see how full that is peach choices, of course.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, there are, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I guess those are art things hanging around there. That's too much as well, I believe. So. All right. So I found this example of possibilities of remodel. You're going to see amazing transformation here. Now, I think they put all the junk on the counter just to make it look really bad, but this is a very small kitchen that was in Australia. And, you know, the typical woodworker failure here, I think, is in doing a remodel is, I can just replace these hideous cabinets with some nice new ones and it'll be just fine. Rather than thinking out of the box and how far can I go with this to make it a real nice transformation. That's the after. So a couple of things I wanted to point out. This is still a pretty small space. Is the intersecting geometry on the island, the contrasting, that's again the layered look of the contrasting cabinet groupings. The clear chairs provide some more negative space in a small room. If you didn't have the art on the pantry sliding doors, I think it would probably be still all right, but it just adds some interest to that room, I think. Maybe that's the focal point, perhaps.
What is behind the stove?
That turned out to be a window. They just knocked a hole in the wall and made it a translucent window. So you see that the window is still there, and then where the other window is across over here somewhere.
So those people move out or what?
Did they move out?
Yeah, because I don't see any of their stuff.
Yeah, right. Well, you know, it's hard to imagine they were living in that before, and now they're going to this. So.
Be lost.
What a major transformation. I just wanted to show you that you can really, if you think out of the box, you can do some amazing things with a remodel.
Where did the stuff go, though?
Well, you got a floor-to-ceiling pantry now, so you can put stuff in there. So.
Somebody knew what house.
All right, I want to talk about appliance integration. I think it's one of the essential features of a good contemporary design. This is a picture from Sub-Zero Wolf website. You notice that the ovens here on both sides are the face of the oven is flush to the face of the cabinetry, and the reveal around the ovens is comparable to the reveal around each of the doors on the cabinetry. So that's what I call good integration into your cabinetry. You could put these same ovens in a face frame cabinet, but you would have maybe 1.5 inches or 2 inches of face frame between the edge of the oven and the door above or surrounding it. So it still looks okay, but it's not as clean as to having this flat coplanar surface of the ovens and appliances. Now the refrigerator is not quite as nicely integrated, in my opinion. It's a standard Sub-Zero older design that sticks out about 1 inch from its surrounding surfaces. So it's still pretty nicely integrated. There's no gaps around it like you would have in a freestanding refrigerator. The problem with these are very expensive. So, on the refrigerator side at least, just some things not to do. Standard refrigerator is deeper than 24-inch cabinetry, and it sticks out. As this example, it's sticking out about 8 or 10 inches. And the sides of the refrigerator aren't even the same stainless as the thing, so not a good thing to do. Just avoid that. You make a deeper, if you're going to go with a standard refrigerator, make a deeper recess. This one here is just poorly placed. It's not badly integrated, but you can't open the door all the way, and there's really no surrounding landing zones to take things out and set them down. So some of the contemporary refrigerator solutions, the built-in, like we saw in the Sub-Zero picture, or you can have a built-in with overlay panels. Still, it sticks out, protrudes about 1 inch more than a fully integrated one. And the fully integrated one, you can do anything you want with the doors. They're come panel ready, or they come with stainless steel doors. I tend to like to have the refrigerator look like a refrigerator, rather than, I've seen houses where you have a whole wall and there's 15 feet of a uniform cabinetry, and it's just too much negative space. And so the other thing about this, you notice that they're matching their cabinet poles, which are really tiny. You know, for a heavy refrigerator door, you want something beefy to grab hold of. So if you're going to have to put some nice tall poles like this on your cabinetry, you might as well make that look like a refrigerator and instead of trying to blend it in. Yeah, go ahead.
You can probably tell I've had a lot of refrigerators in my life, but I have a question about, with this kind of construction and your oven goes out, your refrigerator goes out, do you end up rebuilding the whole section of the wall?
No. So let me go back. She wanted to know if these built-in refrigerators, if you have a compressor go out, how do you service it? You have to rebuild. No, they're standard dimensions. Well, I mean, there's various standard dimensions. All right. So these built-in refrigerators are generally 7 feet opening from floor to ceiling, floor to the soffit or whatever, 7 feet. And they come in different widths. These are all, I think these are all, well, the two on the left are 4 foot, 48 inches, another standard dimension. They also come in They also come in columns. Sub-Zero now makes a column that's a fully integrated one. Separate refrigerator, separate freezer. You can separate them or put them together. And again, there's an industry standard in dimensions. I think they would be like 18, 30, 36 for these columns. 48 is a common side-by-side configuration. So,
Which changes over time.
Yeah.
well, I think you're less likely to see, so it's so expensive, they're less likely to change those.
Not just stand, regular refrigerator.
Well, the freestanding ones are changing all the time, yeah.
The height,
Yeah.
they don't make them like they did. So a friend had to have the woodwork all on
Right.
to get it in.
So I agree with that statement is that they're changing the refrigerator dimensions, and it's especially true of freestanding ones. But I think for these built-in refrigerators, you're going to see a lot less of that risk. The other thing about a built-in is they're all serviceable without having to pull them out. They're going back. If you look at the Sub-Zero, you take off that grill and the compressors are up there. There's others that have the compressor underneath, and you just open the doors and you can access down there.
We have a Sub-Zero. We bought it in 1990. So when you look at the total years we've had, I don't
Cost
think
per
it's
year is not so bad.
not so bad, and it looks brand new. I mean, you could look at our refrigerator and you can go down to the store and you can't tell them apart.
Yeah, the built-in refrigerators, if you have a refrigerator freezer, are currently probably $8,000 to $1,000.
I think Sub-Zero now is about 15.
Yeah.
For the one we bought, we paid $9, I think. Yeah.
So they're expensive versus like $3,000 maybe for a freestanding.
Yeah, but I only bought one.
Yeah. So when I was a kid, we had a GE refrigerator that my parents had years before I was born, and it was still ticking along when I moved out of the house 20 years later. So, well, true, yeah. They weren't Energy Star, that's for sure. So a lower cost option is a standard freestanding refrigerator, but you'd like to have them integrated into your cabinetry a little bit better than the previous slide I showed where it's sticking out into the room. So they've come up with a counter depth freestanding refrigerator that is 28 inches versus 34 as a standard front to back dimension. And the way the doors are designed, you still have to leave some amount of space, maybe an inch around them, because and protruding out a little bit. Otherwise, as you open the door, it bumps into the cabinetry.
So I've seen a lot of the recent construction. The builders are getting a lot smarter, and they're recessing the wall behind the refrigerator.
Right, you can do that.
The same refrigerator is $1,000 more at least.
Yeah.
The counter depth.
The counter depth are more expensive and less space. Of course, when you have a 34-inch deep refrigerator, that's where in the back is where all the mold grows, right? And those leftovers you're not seeing. So that's the nice thing about counter depth. You know, the shelves aren't so deep that you lose track of what you've put in there. Another thing to consider in integrating into your design is your plumbing fixtures. Sinks in particular can make or break your design a bit. Generally, the same concept, clean, crisp lines, apply to your sinks. Two on the left are it's an undermount and a top mount, but the corners are small radii instead of the traditional sink on the right that has, large radii and a lip over the sink.
Much easier to clean.
What's that? The large radii?
Yeah.
Yeah, some of these contemporaries are actually sharp corners, and so you look at the one on the bottom, that happens to be my sink. It's about a 3/4 inch radius, and so it's just easy to clean. But the ones that are sharp, I would, in a practical sense, avoid those. A couple of comments about a undermount sink, as you see in this upper left example. I think it looks great, but there's a couple of practicality things you might want to consider before going there. Generally, you're going to put this in say a quartz counter or maybe a solid surface counter, which are vulnerable. The edges of that are very vulnerable around the sink. You know, if you're washing pots and pans and a klutz like me, you're going to bang that edge and it's going to be chipped and you have to repair it. It's all repairable, but it's a pain.
There are a lot of traditional sink designs now available in undermount, and it's not just the contemporary.
Right, sure. The other thing about undermount is that the small transition between the sink and the counter, there's a gap that has to be caulked. And so there's the place where all the crud grows and the nasty stuff stays unless you're remembering to brush it out and clean it frequently. So just a couple practical things before you go that route. The sink on the bottom is what they call a universal mount. It's got a thin, slim rim that's not raised like the picture on the right here. It's just the thickness of the sheet metal. And you can undermount that or top mount it like I've done here. So I chose to go top mount just to avoid the damage to corners. Another thing you can do, obviously this is not a contemporary faucet, you wouldn't want to use that, but this dishwasher air gap, you don't have to use that. You can use what they call a high loop drain. So basically the drain coming out of your dishwasher goes to this air gap and it prevents backflow into your dishwasher. But if you run the high loop up to the top underside of your counter, that's code legal, and then it goes to your garbage disposal. So consider that instead of having another piece of stuff on your counter there. All your rooms are going to have windows, so let's talk about that a bit. So for a traditional window, you're going to have sills and casings and trim. You'd use curtains and drapes. For contemporary, no sill. You could make a reveal like is shown in this example, or just a drywall return. And I'd recommend lower shades or blinds rather than curtains and drapes. If you're doing a remodel or new construction, consider, do you want to add motorization, power? Do you want to put a soffit above so you can hide the curtain or blind in there when it's up? Put some blocking wherever you're going to put screws and stuff in. So just some pre-construction considerations. So I'm just going to give you some thoughts on, how are we doing on time, by the way?
5 minutes.
5 minutes, okay. Big project planning, and these are my ideas, so feel free to chime in if you have some other things to talk about. Know your constraints, your budget, your time, limitations on your skills and equipment. Recognize your biases. We talked about those woodworker biases. It's not just cabinets. Functionality, your ADA needed, or work habits and all that kind of stuff. Investigate different design styles. Don't just settle for what you're used to. Visit showrooms, home shows, trade shows. There's a nice one called KBIS, it's Kitchen and Bath Industry Show. And I think next year in January it's in Las Vegas. I've gone to some of those. It takes 3 days to go through the show. It's like 4 football fields full of manufacturers' stuff. And you get ideas and all kinds of new materials. Tour the parade of homes. Santa Fe in particular has a lot of really nice contemporary homes on their parade in the fall, or August, I think. View online photos and build a portfolio of the things that you like. Mixing different design styles can be successful, but it's kind of risky. Just be careful. Investigate materials that you might want to use, or wood finishes and color, hardware, counters, flooring, backsplash, appliances, plumbing, all those things. It's not just cabinets. So review industry standards and guides. I'm going to hand out at the end of the break here, I'll hand out a thing that has a nice industry guide for kitchen layout and design. It's based on kitchen bath industry standards, and it has some things you could do, and your assignment is to go through that on your own kitchen and say, why does my kitchen work or why it doesn't? See if that you can get an answer from going through that guide. Think out of the box. Can I remove a wall or move plumbing, electrical? Don't settle on familiar concepts. And if possible, I like to connect the architecture outside to the stuff you're doing inside, in some little way at least. I mean, the outside architecture, if you're going all contemporary, is the same kind of thing, crisp, clean lines. You don't want to put rounded corners on your stucco edges. You want nice, crisp corners, both inside and outside corners. And get advice from experienced designers. Don't just go from things that you are familiar with. Iterate on your design. Basic layout, add details. Use a 3D CAD if you have it and can do that. If you can't visualize, a lot of people just draw a sketch and they know exactly what it looks like to them, but sometimes 3D CAD really helps to visualize that. And this is important. And as a mechanical designer, I would go through it and do all these preliminary things, and I say, I'm not really satisfied with that. I just put it aside for a few days. And I wake up in the middle of the night and have a solution. And so let it simmer for a while. And then, try some other ideas and repeat this until you're satisfied. And then a sanity check, review the design with others. This is probably a good point to stop. Okay, so I'm going to do a little show and tell, trying to relate my project to some of the previous discussions here. So the scope of my project was the entire house design in a contemporary style. I would call it a Southwest contemporary, and if we have time, I'll show you a couple exterior elevations. My construction tasks, being retired, I had time to do things that I didn't have when I was raising kids and working. So did built-in cabinets, kitchen, laundry, 4 baths, a dining buffet, a computer area, and a few others. Made more sawdust for this project than my entire life put together. So it included 80 drawer fronts and 30 door fronts in the cabinetry. Made 16 interior doors and jambs. 3 of those were double doors. Included an 8-foot by 9-foot 3-panel sliding door, 7-foot diameter dining table. If we have time, I'll show a little bit about that. Shelving and drawers for 5 closets. So my goals were, again, a contemporary Southwest architecture, 2-color stucco, flat roof, aluminum accents, which tied into some of the interior detailing, some intersecting geometry with, again, crisp edges, sharp corners, no rounded stuff for a contemporary design. I had to design around existing trees, which was quite a challenge. I wanted a warm contemporary interior rather than a stark white. That a lot of architecture, like we talked earlier, would like this white palette to as the interior of your house. Had that before in my previous house, and started to get tired of just that much white. Emphasis on built-in casework versus a freestanding furniture. And as I mentioned, I wanted to try to connect interior with the outside in some small way at least. I selected bamboo for the cabinets, and so you say, why did you do that? Well, my wife was working here as a volunteer, and she liked the warm color of these bamboo cabinets, so we elected to go that direction. It's a nice color without having to stain it. It's through color in the wood. 3-ply, 3-ply veneer plywood is the standard. They do make multiple plies. Has an interesting exposed wood effect, as you see. Let's see up here. You know, you don't have to veneer the edge or edge band it. You can just leave it as it is, and it has a nice, interesting effect, and it works in machines like solid wood.
It's just a point of information. Bamboo is actually grass. It's not.
Yeah, I realize that. Yeah. So let's see. I wanted to pass out some stuff. While I'm talking about bamboo, I'm going to pass this box around. Let's keep all the samples in this box and just pass it around. There's different types of bamboo colors and construction, so you can see examples in here. So one thing to be aware of is bamboo is in a 3-ply configuration on 3/4 inch thick. It sort of violates good working practices. You've got grain running 2 directions, and they're thick layers. And so as you change humidity and temperature, you want to expand or contract more across the grain rather than longitudinally with the grain. And so in a standard plywood layup where you have like 5 plies or more in a 3/4 inch panel, you have very thin, relatively thin veneers. And so what's keeping the veneer of a thin layer, or that layer that wants to expand or contract, it's bonded in shear to the layer beneath it or above it. And so you have a force developed as it tries to expand and contract, but it's restrained by that shear layer of the bond between the layers. And so when you have a thin layer, the force developed by the expanding and contracting wood is low enough that shear layer of glue can restrain it. While you have a thick layer, like you see here, you have a much larger force developed. And so the possibility of the surface checking is much greater. So I don't believe they control humidity in this building, but it would be advisable to do so, I think, on a 3/4 inch panel. Otherwise, you might get some problems. Yeah.
Have you seen any warping or checking in your house?
Yeah, before we got our humidifier going, the first winter, you know, it's 10-15% relative humidity at 70 degrees. And it was that way for about a month, and I had a couple of doors that had a very minor check on the surface. So once we're keeping it about 30% now, and it doesn't, as long as you have a good finish on both sides, you can withstand excursions out of that ideal humidity range. And this product is all made in China, so it's designed for probably like 50% relative humidity, which you see in July and August here, and that's about it. So 30% in our house seems to be just fine.
Where do you source the plywood?
I'm going to pass out a handout, and you'll have every source that I use for this entire project on it. So it'll answer all your questions there. Let's see. So a brief description of how bamboo, plywood, and products are made. You start with a log of bamboo, and I think they're 4 to 5 years old, 9-10 centimeters in diameter, and they run them through this machine that splits it into the sections like you see there. And then they're planed, and then they're boiled in hydrogen peroxide for 7 hours. And then there's an optional step that can, and the hydrogen peroxide takes care of all the fungi and various things that are in the wood, and also it bleaches it to a uniform light color. And you'll see some samples of the light colors around in that box. Then there's an optional step if you don't want the light coloration. They pressure cook it, and it changes it to this warmer caramelized or carbonized color that they call in the industry. Then they're kiln dried to 9%, and that's, for Albuquerque, that's not a very compatible moisture content.
Can the raw finished product be stayed successful?
Yeah, you'll see an example in my project here. The strips are sanded, then they're glued into either this plain pressed layup or the side pressed layup. And the product you see here on the walls is a side pressed. Then the side pressed are bandsawed to thickness and plain to thickness. Then they're glued into 3, 5, or 9 ply panels, cut to size, and then sanded to thickness. So they also make a product you'll see in the box that I'm passing around called strand woven, and it's basically slivers of bamboo that are oriented more or less in the same direction, and then they're pressed with adhesive into a panel. It's kind of like OSB plywood, except not sheets, it's strands. And they also will do what they call a fossilize, where they mix the light strands with the darker strands. It's kind of an interesting layup. So I happen to have a 3D CAD program I acquired during a consulting project after I retired. This happens to be SolidWorks, and this is what I utilize to visualize my kitchen design. Let's see if I can do this. So this was my first stab at it. Anybody a SolidWorks user here? SolidWorks, it's a three-dimensional mechanical design CAD software. So anyway, you can do some nice things with it. It's a very, very expensive program. I wouldn't recommend purchasing it for casual design, but if you happen to have some place you can use one, it's something that's worthwhile. Can you do SketchUp? Can you do colors and solids and?
Yes.
Okay, so Ben can tell you all about how to do it on the cheap. So one thing I was trying to do here in this initial design was the island. I liked intersecting geometries of the island, and it kind of tied into some of the exterior design features on my house. But in a practical sense, it just eliminated a lot of counter space that I could use for preparation. And the other thing I didn't like is the appliance wall on the far left there, with the bamboo cabinetry above and below the ovens. It just seemed like it was too busy, too much going on that wall. So the next iteration was this, where I replaced the bamboo cabinetry with a black glass cabinet facing to match the black glass in the appliances. To me, that looked much better, and that's what we went with. And then the island was just a single slab with a downturn. They call waterfall counters that go wrap around the ends. Otherwise, no changes. It's basically the same sort of thing. The cabinet at the far right here is actually a double door pantry. So, I'm sorry, what? Up here? That's a granite slab? Okay. So next I'm going to go through some pictures. I want to give you a sense of the overall space, and then we'll start to dwell down onto the individual details of the cabinetry. So there was kind of two focal points in this design, is that the view window of the mountain and then the granite slab was kind of the art for the kitchen. It has a lot of movement in the design of the granite. And then
Is this your place?
yeah. So the other thing is that what I like to do, instead of having this big gymnasium tall ceiling over the kitchen, over the dining, and over the living, it just feels too large. To drop the ceilings over the kitchen, it helps to define that space. Also, there's a soffit over the island, which helps to define the space as well. All right, then, if you swing around to the right here, there's a dining area, part of the same great room. and the cabinetry there is different to kind of go with the table and chairs. I can't take credit for the chairs. They're TEMA chairs. This was executed in quarter sawn ash cabinetry as well as a quarter sawn veneered table. And we'll get into more details of the table later. Let's see. I want to pass out. The handout has a list of virtually all the sources I use for this project. And also, there's been a couple of people that were interested in coming out to see the house. So I thought anybody who wants to come out this afternoon, welcome to do so. There's a map and directions on the back of the page.
Question.
Yeah.
Looks like you changed the design of the island to a single purpose island.
Yeah, so, right. Well, the intersecting geometry, which I really liked visually, but it's just practicality in terms of having more work surface on a single surface there. So, working down in toward the cabinetry, bamboo is all, you notice there's grain matching across the horizontal grain of the cabinets. The upper is a single flipper door. I wanted to emphasize the horizontal grain there. Again, it's a grass, not really a grain, but that's, for lack of a better term, that's what I'm going to use. Pantry at the right, a glass-faced oven, cabinets above. And
Are those multiple panels above the flipper?
a single door, it's about almost 7 feet. Single door. Yeah. There's multiple cabinets behind it. You'll see a detailed picture later. Let's see. So the inset area there is a 3D CNC machined MDF panel. And it's just painted. I got that over in Tempe, Arizona. These are really expensive, but I found a guy that had a couple of damaged sheets. So we were heading over there for a little vacation trip, and I picked up 3 sheets for $100. Normally they're about $400 a sheet, seriously. And I sold 2 of them for what I had and kept the one for myself. So if I had to buy a new one, I wouldn't have paid that much for one, I'll tell you.
And you say it's painted. Is it painted with multiple tones to emphasize the effect, or is that just
no? There's a light under the counter that gives you that effect. Yeah, it's all one color. So the base cabinets are all drawers, and rather than go on a standard drawer and a door, and then if you want more drawers, you open the door and pull out an interior drawer. I had that in my previous house, and I hated it. It was one more step, and plus now you got hinges over there, and you pull out a drawer, and there's something that hanging over the side, and it snags on the drawer. Else you have to make the drawer narrower. Just not something I would recommend, interior drawers. The other thing I tried to do here was use a golden ratio on sizing the height of the drawers. It's a roughly 1.62, and if you take that ratio and multiply it by the height of the first drawer, it should be the second drawer, and so on and so on. And also it turns out that if you add the height of 2 drawers, the next drawer should be that height. So that's the golden ratio. If you're a mathematician type of guy, you can derive that pretty easily. It's a simple equation.
1.6.
1.62.
62.
Let's see, this is a LED backlit backsplash custom fabrication that we did. Let's see. Detail on the drawers. It's an aluminum extrusion. And I'm going to pass it around here. So here's a sample of a drawer, how it's put together. So it's an aluminum channel on the edges and then an aluminum extrusion drawer pull. And I used 2 coats of a Gemini conversion varnish, and it's really it applies like lacquer. It's a lacquer solvent-based product, but it's kind of like a pre-catalyzed lacquer, if you're familiar with that. But it works just like lacquer. It's tough as nails. I really like it. Spray. I used a HVLP sprayer.
Was it applied to the wood before the...
Yeah, I'm going to go through the steps. Before the aluminum was on after the last step.
Do you have a question?
Question? So the back side of the island is just doors. So there's the cabinet on the right is just a face for a dishwasher. And then, again, rather than putting false drawer fronts across under the sink, I just said, well, it's just tall doors. Again, notice the grain is matched across all of those drawers. The same on the double pantry door, and that's just a standard hinged door for the pantry. I'll have a lot more detail on the pantry later, but notice each of the panels has grain matched across, and there's an aluminum 1/8 inch by 1/2 inch strip in a dado on those doors. So again, the upper is a single flipper door, and it uses, there's 3 melamine cabinet boxes to span that roughly 7-foot length. And there's two pairs of these Salici flipper door hardware.
How does that part look like?
It's spring-loaded and it's soft damper closed. So once you get within an inch or 2 of being closed, it self-closes softly. So
How does it go up to a horizontal?
no, that's as high as it goes. If you're a tall guy, my wife and I aren't tall enough to get headbanged. There's about 6 feet or 6'1" to the bottom edge of that. So if you're taller than that, you'd be cracking your head on it. So I wouldn't recommend it.
So you got the cabinet boxes from IKEA?
Yes.
Was that online, and do you custom?
I'm going to talk more about IKEA, but let me say that all the melamine boxes, both uppers and lowers, were from IKEA, and they're. I do like melamine for cabinetry. I wouldn't use for anything but a fixed cabinet. I wouldn't make a freestanding piece of furniture with particle board melamine, but it's a nice, easy to clean interior. And it was, for me, a cheap way to go. I didn't have gang drills, and I didn't have edge banding equipment. And there's other sources we'll talk about in a bit. Yeah.
That's a really big door. Was there trying to eliminate vertical lines in there, as opposed to maybe 3?
Yeah, I wanted to accentuate the horizontal lines of the kitchen. So the other nice thing about this, in a practical sense, you just open the door and you're doing your meal preparation or cleanup, and everything's open and exposed, and you can take things out of the dishwasher and not have to mess with the door until it's all done. So sort of a practical thing as well. I meant to mention that the aluminum trim and door pulls were from Outwater Plastic. There's a lot of hand filing that goes on all these little corners on the aluminum, so it's a lot of work. I'm not suggesting that anybody copy this, but be aware that just a saw cut miter is sharp, and so there was hand filing on every single corner on this thing. With some custom electrical details. So the detailing on this backsplash, there's outlets on each of these aluminum pieces, and on the aluminum channel between cabinet doors, there's an outlet. So an island has to have power on it, and So most people would put it on the end, which is a wood panel, and obviously I couldn't do that very easily on a quartz countertop. So we did this aluminum trim there.
Is one of those a dishwasher?
Yeah, the one on the right is a dishwasher.
Is the aluminum finish all natural?
It's anodized, clear anodized.
So you had to do all these parts and you get them anodized?
Well, most of them, no, most of the things are, you buy them in stock.
Yeah, but you were talking about the final, you had to
You cut the edges.
Well, the edges, I mean, they blend in color-wise. You don't really notice, you know. You know, if you get up there close, you can tell that they're bare aluminum that's been filed away. So all of these cutouts for the outlets, I'm machined on router table carefully. So if you've never done it, you just be careful. Light cuts, and come talk to me in detail about it if you want to try that. It could easily get away from you. So, looking at the oven columns, first friend I had come in and see this, he asked me, where did I get column ovens that are 7 feet high? So I said, oh, that's exactly what the look I wanted, to see this integrated units instead of having something so that above each of the ovens there's a cabinet door, and below the ovens there's drawers. The turns out that these are IKEA appliances, and IKEA sold handles that are the same profile as the oven appliances, so kind of lucked out there. The drawers are faced with a 1/4-inch black glass. It's not completely opaque, but it's almost, and it's the resource list has a detail of what that glass is.
Quick question.
Yeah.
When you took those microwaves that high, did you ever think about your house might be occupied by somebody my size someday?
Well, you can use the lower microwave. There's two, so. You might say, why did you have 2 microwaves? Well, when we had a house full of kids, we were always waiting in line for the microwave. So let's go 2, you know. Leftover day, you know, you eat, one guy eats, and the next guy's cooking his food, and he's gone, and she's gone. So the substrate for the glass was, I think it's 5/8 or 1/2-inch Baltic birch plywood painted black. And then the glass is glued, adhered with black silicone. All right, so how did I make these aluminum trim doors? I had a router table with some little custom roller hold downs, and this router assembly here was just 2 slot cutters with a bearing, and it had a custom made ring that goes on the bearing to give me the correct depth of cut. So the depth of these rabbets from the outer face of the cabinet to the edge of the rabbet was controlled by this bearing. And the distance between the bearing, between the cutters, controls the width of the cut, one cut on each side. And it's important to index it to the front face of the cabinet. So there was.
There appears to be a portion of a spline on the right side.
Yeah, that was for the T-slot handle.
So you cut that into it.
Yeah, when that thing comes around, you'll see, the sample comes around, you'll see. So the first step was to cut that slot for the handle. And then cut the rabbets, the dual rabbets on each of 3 sides. So it's important to put, I wanted everything indexed to the face of the cabinet wood, because there's variations in thickness of the plywood. And you want to cut so as you're, for example, let's say you're cutting this way. If the router's turning this way, it's going to want to splinter that corner right there. So what you want to do is cut the cross grain first, You don't care about the splinters because they're going to be machined away with the next rabbet cut. Cut both cross grains first and then cut with the grain and finish it off. Also, you notice on my setup here I have a piece of MDF that I use to follow through, and that helps minimize any splintering after the cut. And it's important to have a hold down before and after the cutter, so that if you just had one going in, then once it leaves that, you're still in the cutter and it's going to create some problems. The other thing, you notice I have a fence there, but the depth of the cut is actually controlled by this bearing. The fence is set back maybe a 64th from where the tangent to the bearing is. So it allows me to feed it pretty much in line with the fence, and then it engages the bearing, and that controls the depth of cut. To me, it machines just like walnut in terms of, which isn't that terribly hard wood. It was drilling holes, very little splintering. I found it a real pleasure to work with.
Could you say that again about you said the bearing is part of the fence?
Yes. Right. So the fence, having the fence, I could have done it just freehand with the bearing only, but that wouldn't have allowed me to use the hold downs very easily. So the hold downs are attached to the fence, and the fence is just set back a little bit from the bearing tangent point, so that the fence gives me the right direction, aligns me with the hold downs, and also then as soon as it engages the bearing, then that controls the depth of cut. You got it? Okay. The other thing, just as a side note, the way I designed these hold downs, they're angled such that as they roll through, they keep pressure against the bearing in the fence. You can buy those too. I just bought some cheap roller blade bearing wheels and made my own. So
you can get any rockets from one side of the fence to the other, since the bearing on the other fence, there's no...
It's so close to being tangent, even if it's on the fence, then the bearing, and then it's on the fence, it doesn't really matter. This kind of shows my sequence of assembly. So the first thing was to machine that slot for the handle, then the rabbets for the trim, and then I did some preliminary sanding, and then carefully, then I carefully sanded, so that the edge of this rabbet here is sanded with like a 320, maybe 280 grit, very carefully by hand, just to give a little relief to that sharp edge. Then I sprayed it, and then I installed the handle using a polyurethane. It's kind of like Gorilla Glue. It's a Grizzly Structan polyurethane glue. Comes in a caulk tube, very easy to apply, cheaper than Gorilla Glue. It dries more or less clear. Foams up just like Gorilla Glue if it's not confined. So it's a gap-filling thing, adhesive. With a T-slot handle, it's kind of designed not to be bonded in there, but my first sample without bonding, it was kind of loose. I figured that's going to come apart eventually. So cut that aluminum a little bit long. Once the glue was set, then I trimmed the ends of the aluminum handle to be 1/16 inch beyond the edge of the board, so it will line up with the later to be assembled channel. Okay. Then I calculated how much adhesive I needed on the channel. I made this little squeegee with a notch in it, and applied the Sikaflex construction polyurethane adhesive. It's got a lot of flexibility, so I didn't want something that was rigid for those channels, thinking there might be some relative movement between the plywood and the aluminum, although I haven't really seen that after 3 years. So squeegeed that out to meter that adhesive. Then I applied the channels, and I just used stretch wrap to hold it in place. Just left it that way until about ready to install. So I used IKEA parts, as we mentioned earlier, for the melamine boxes, and they also have Bloom hardware. So all the drawer boxes are what they call, I'm going to demonstrate that, Bloom tandem box drawers, full extension, soft close. And the nice thing about IKEA, once or twice a year they have a big sale on kitchen stuff, including cabinets and appliances. And so I took advantage of that. It's kind of based on, the amount of discount is based on how much you're going to buy. Yeah. Question?
Where's IKEA located?
There's one in Tempe and one in Denver area. So I didn't go there. I mean, we just called in the order and they delivered it.
Are the cabinet boxes pre-grown or your own imagination?
So I want to show this Bloom tandem box. Anybody is familiar with the Bloom tandem box? So the Bloom tandem box is a metal-sided half-inch melamine bottom drawer, full extension, soft close. And the drawer front just have two little clips that are screwed onto it. And let's see. That's it. So the time to assemble the drawer, the back disc kind of the same thing, snaps together. The time to assemble the drawer and screw the sides, screw the rail runners into the cabinet, 5 minutes per drawer. So obviously I have a lot more time in the drawer front. So after we're done here, feel free to play with this.
The sides and legs are not part of what you bought.
This is just a demonstration thing I made for you. Yeah.
It's the box with the rollers that you put into the...
Correct. Right. So.
You didn't say that was IKEA sourced, right? Bloom is not IKEA sourced.
Yeah, but that's what they use.
Bloom uses it.
Yeah.
IKEA uses Bloom.
Yeah. Same with the hinges as well.
So how much variance do you have on the width of your drawers with that stuff?
I think the IKEA boxes are probably accurate within a 30-second.
No, I mean the size.
Could you get 24 centimeters?
If you've got an odd dimension for the width and you're making a couple of cabinets,
You'd have to
size them right to
you can buy the Bloom
tandem box and then just make a back for the drawer as well. So right now they got a metal back which is sized for 15, 18, 24, and 30. Yeah, that's right. 15, 18, 24, and 30 I think are the ones they stock. Maybe in a 36. Let's see. So there's other sources for rather than IKEA. Yeah.
Did you have any contractors help you with your kitchen construction?
No.
No one outside?
No.
Tell us what your budget was.
Yeah, I brought that. It was pretty substantial, but all right, let's see so remember I'm making 80 drawer fronts, 80 drawers, okay? It was like 60 doors or 30 doors, 40 doors, whatever. The bamboo plywood for the cabinets and my 16 doors was $4,800. The hardware, core lumber, conversion varnish and stuff was $3,500. So Anyway, now that was for the doors, 16 doors. The cabinets for that amount of cabinetry, 80 doors, 80 drawers, 30 doors, rods and shelves and stuff for 5 closets, which included 16 drawers, was about $13,000. My general contractor said if he had bid that out, it would have been $50K or more in total. So when you're retired, you have a lot of
worksheet for yourself.
Neil, I have a little confusion on your thing at Giese. Did you use 2 different kinds, or was it one kind?
There was 2 kinds. So the Grizzly Structan is the Gorilla glue type stuff that I used to glue the T-slot handle into the drawer front. And the Sikaflex, it's basically a caulk. It's polyurethane caulk. That was that was a gray stuff you saw on the channels. That was used just for the channels.
And is that on your list here?
The Sikaflex? I don't know, maybe not. You can get... So there's some other sources for cabinet parts if you don't want to make all the boxes, which I definitely didn't want to do. So that's shown on the bottom here. So you've seen the demonstration of that. I just wanted to talk about screws a minute. So all of these are installed with Euro screws versus a number 6 screw, which has the same head size and same Phillips, number 2 Phillips. But as you can see, it's much larger on the thread diameter, holds much better in particle board. Number 6 screw works probably okay in hardwood, but not in a particle board cabinet box. So I don't know if you've had experience with that, but I have, and I mean this number 6 screw is kind of standard for a long time.
Yeah, it looks like your Euro screw has an interesting head. Like it might take Phillips, but it might also take square drive.
Yeah, I think so. I don't know where I got that. It was in my hardware box. So I won't spend much time here, but you're probably all familiar with the Euro-style hinges. This is what came from IKEA. What I liked about IKEA, they have Inserta, which is a expanding insert on the door. No screws needed. So that little, I think I've got one over here I can demonstrate. So if you're not familiar with this, on the pocket side, there's a little door hinge, and when you close that, it expands these plastic or rubber stops out into your hole. And it's good or better than screws, in my opinion. I've never had anything loosen up. And then what they call the expando, they're just plastic expansions. There's a screw already pre-installed in the expansion, and you just screw them in and it expands into your 5mm hole in your cabinet side. Works great. So if anybody have legs on your peel and stick bumpers? I mean, I stick them on, and a year later, they're not even on the same mating surfaces. They're over here on this side. And so Woodworkers sells these little things that fit in a 5mm hole. And
Bumpers.
Silicone bumpers, I don't know. Woodworkers has them. They're cheap. Consider using them. They're a little thick, in my opinion, but you can sand them down pretty easily. The other thing I want to mention, and I'll show you a solution later, is that when you have a shelf hole in a melamine cabinet and you pull that shelf bracket out of the hole, you're probably going to chip the melamine 50% of the time you pull that out. So I've got a solution I'll tell you later. Back to some show and tell on the cabinetry. This is the adjacent laundry, and I used a Revishelf pull-out folding ironing board. We don't iron very much, so doesn't get used very often. Another thing, above the washer and dryer, the typical cabinetry is 12 inches deep, just like a standard upper cabinet. And if it's up against the wall, you got to reach all the way over your washer and dryer to get into the cabinet. So I had the framers bump out a soffit, if you want to call it that, behind that cabinet, 1 foot deep. So they're closer to the front, easier to get into. I could have, but then you still have the same problem. You're reaching all the way back to the wall to get stuff in there. So this is another area where I used the aluminum trim on the cabinetry. In the desk area, it's exactly the same as you saw for the kitchen. And this, if you're anything like me, your desk never looks like that. And so...
Are you telling us that's staged?
That's staged, yes, definitely. And so I made these doors that cover that entire... So this is the same view, except the door's closed. It's a three-panel door. And there's a little tricky detail on how these are connected at the bottom, but I don't want to get into that. You can talk to me after if you want more info on that.
These are the ones that are above the
yeah, so you see that there's a track up here. Yes. You see the ends of the door here? So they just slide out on that track. No track on the floor, it's just on the ceiling. So it's a little magic on how these are connected down here, but it's too much detail to get to right now.
How heavy or light are those doors?
They're pretty light. These are 1/4-inch panels.
Okay.
And the thickness of the aluminum framing is about an inch or a little over. The framing came from Atwater Plastic as well. It's a FOGA system on your handout there. That's a trade show assembly erector set kind of stuff. So the rest of the cabinets in the house, and I'm not going to talk too much about them, are not aluminum trim. They're just simple plywood boxes with the nice exposed edge of the bamboo plywood, and stainless steel handles from IKEA. Again, notice the cantilever cabinet. It creates a little negative space for that area. And the only reason I'm showing you this picture is just a photographic tip. Same point of view on this cabinet, but on the first one, I'm holding the camera perfectly vertical. And so you see that the vertical lines stay vertical in your picture. And here I'm looking kind of down at an angle, and it's just not as photogenic for architectural picture taking. I mean, if you're really doing it, you're going to do a tripod and have it a bubble level. And
you got glare on the screen in the first one and not on the second one.
Yeah.
What, up here?
Yeah, there.
Right.
Just open the camera and get rid of that. Photoshop.
Well, it's because of the angle of the camera, I guess. I don't know. Anyway, the point is keep your camera vertical for your picture, photographing your work. Just showing the master bath cabinets, typical cabinets for the bathroom. No real comment there. Let's see.
What was your timeline for construction?
I didn't keep a record of it, so I don't know, a few months. I don't know. I was working on this. I was working a consulting job at the same time, so. So I want to spend a little time on this. This is a guest bath that was featured in the Sukasa magazine as well. It's the same bamboo plywood that you saw in everything else, but it's dyed red, and it's a trans-tint dye. We wanted something that was sort of unnatural and wild, so that's what we came up with. Kind of stimulated by the sink was what we came up with. My wife picked out the sink. I'm going to show you how we did that bending. My wife picked out the sink, and then the design of the bathroom kind of evolved from that. So let's see. So I made that curved base out of 3 layers of 1/4-inch bamboo plywood that was curved. And so this was an experiment I did. I didn't know, I'd never done it before, and didn't know if I could bend. There was a 9-inch radius, I think. These are 7 on this form here. So I said, if I can do a 7, I can definitely do a 9. So I made this form out of particle board. Basically, you make one with with a compass and sanding and drum sander, and then you make the other 4 pieces with a flush trim router bit, and then assemble it all up like it's shown there. So you say, what staples, what's fine woodworking there going on? So you'll see in a minute. So that's the first layer, goes down against the form with the uncurved side against the form, and just stapled with 1/4-inch staples. Uh-oh. All right, never mind. So the next layer, lots of glue, just Type Bond 2 glue. Stick them together and staple them up. So we say, what do you do with the staples? Well, you cut them off. So router table with a little saw blade on there. Trim it out of the form. So I'm gonna. The form is up. Ooh. The form is up here. I'm not going to pass it around, but there's the resulting piece. And then here's a curved piece of 1/4-inch plywood.
Did you buy the curved plywood?
No, I just table saw. Yeah. That took a while to do that, but these are like 3/8 on center, so.
Neil, would you back up to the bathroom and show where that curved piece is installed?
So the front here, so it's 3/4-inch thick with 3 layers of 1/4-inch curved glued together.
I saw the second layer come, and then
I skipped over the second layer. So there's 2 layers. The outer layers are facing curved in, and the inner layer doesn't matter which way it goes. At least I don't think it does.
So you just wanted to thick. You could have gone with 2, could you not?
Probably.
Are there staples on the surface of this that have been cut off?
Yeah, if you look at the form there, that's where the staples stay.
Oh, just on the form.
Yeah, the staples are out into the form, and then if you look at this last picture, the form is cut away.
Okay, but the final piece doesn't have, the final
Correct.
surface has no staples.
No staples, right?
So, how did you handle the edge treatment?
You mean all the slots here? Yeah. Well, one of them's up against the counter. The other one's the bottom. I just puttied over it, so you don't really see it.
Neil?
Yeah.
Did you have to wet this to bend it? Or
No.
did you dry?
I mean, try it. It's easy to bend.
Well, we're afraid it's going to snap.
No, you won't. You'll be all right. If you do, it doesn't matter.
So you stapled the ends and then you cut the ends off?
So, I thought about making a 2-part form, and I said, man, it's going to take forever to do that. So it's quick and dirty. All right. Back to the, how are we doing? 5? Okay. So I told you if we had time, we'd talk a little bit about the dining buffet. And this is out of quarter sawn ash. At least most of the parts are. And the table was a quarter sawn veneer with a bent lamination rim. If I have time, I'll talk about the table. But I wanted to talk about the doors on the buffet. a friend of mine, Steve Mattson. How many know Steve Mattson? He and his brother built the cabinets in my previous house in Cedar Crest, and they came up with this 3D inlay on a panel door, and I said, I want to have that to tie into my old house that I loved. So he agreed to do the artwork on this. I just made a panel frame door for him and gave him the door, and he came up with these little pieces to stick in there. So something a little bit different than tied to our old house that we have memories of. The upper cabinets are just glass with a it's a chrome-plated bar in the front there.
What do you use for a pull on those doors?
On the doors?
Oh, there is a pull. I didn't see it very well.
It's a long handle here. See it?
Yeah. That's the way you did that.
All right. So little detail on the pantry doors. If you're designing a pantry, you don't want to have a really deep pantry because you're going to lose things in the back. So the recommendations from what I've read, absolute maximum shelf depth inside is 14 inches. 10 to 12 is recommended. And then have narrow shelves on your doors like I've shown here. So there's a detail of the shelf on the door. One thing to note here in construction detail, this shelf is set back about 1/8 of an inch. Everything on here has got a 1/16 inch radius on the edges, and I set it back 1/8 of an inch so that, number one, you don't have to have those radii intersecting and try to figure out how to sand all of that. You just run the router on the edges and assemble it without having to worry about it. Plus, as things move around, you don't have that edge-to-edge joint that's going to shift on you and crack the finish. So just something to think about. The pantry has some peel and stick LED on the inside of the door jamb that comes on when the door is open. And I want to talk about this a bit. So these shelves are high-pressure laminate Formica on both sides of a 1.25 inch. It's called a rim board. It's basically an OSB 12-inch board that they use in framing. And I calculated that a particle board 30/4 on a 40-inch span was insufficient. So I went with this OSB, which is stiffer, about as stiff as plywood, maybe slightly stiffer. I wanted to have the shelves reversible, so rather than notching the bottom, where are you at here? On these standard shelf clips that fit in a 5mm hole, rather than notching the bottom to keep the shelf from sliding out on you, I put the dado in the edge of the shelf, which grabs hold of the edge of the clip. And so now the shelves are reversible and they won't pull out.
It seemed like that'd be really prone to chipping from run the dado through there. Was that a problem?
I stacked up the shelves. There's 7 shelves, I guess, and I did the dados that way. So I think on the end I might have taped them or something, but very carefully on the exit and entrance point. So I told you I would share with you a method of preventing chipping at your holes. So I just have a little Dremel grinder that put in a drill and sort of put a micro bevel on the edge of your hole. So on each of these holes, you may be able to even see it on this picture. There's a little bit of a bevel there. And so from a distance, it's imperceptible, but it's enough. You're pulling that shelf clip out, it doesn't chip anymore. Another comment on your passage latch for, let's say, a double door. Typically, you put this at the top. There's a couple options. You can use a roller catch or this ball catch, and I wouldn't even bother with a ball catch. If you've ever pulled one open, they just feel awful. Spend the extra couple of bucks and go with a roller catch. All right, last picture. There's the exterior of the house, a couple of views. So same deal applies, crisp, sharp corners, intersecting geometry on this stuff here. So if you're doing a remodel and want to change the outside of a typical stucco box in Albuquerque, it's pretty easy. You can add some bump outs and change the soffit heights a bit, change 2 colors of stucco. Pretty simple. All right.
Thank you.